Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Pleasure to welcome back to the program Jamelle Bouie, opinion columnist at the New York Times, co-host of the Unclear and Present Danger podcast. Jamelle, welcome back to the show. I want to say right up front, the reason why I wanted to book you on this Friday, and we were talking about this about a week and a half ago, I was like, there's going to be some Supreme Court, they're going to be dropping over the course of the week. I don't know what they're going to be. Next week we'll have, someone who's dedicated to writing about the Supreme Court on, but we'll have Jamelle on and we'll be able to talk about these things just in case some of these horrible cases drop, particularly the Chevron one and whatnot. And I thought, it'll be the day after the debate. We'll probably say a couple words about it, but it's not going to be earth shattering. It didn't work out that way. Welcome back to the program, Jamelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Lots to talk about. All of it bad, of course.
All of it bad.
What a week.
Not to mention, obviously, yeah.
Jamal Bowman losing to George Latimer. I mean, like that. This has been a week of horrors, really, honestly. So let's have some fun.
We start off the show by talking about, and I know you've been doing this for a long time as well, writing about politics and observing them, and I imagine you've seen dozens of debates and the aftermath. I don't think there has been a more both organic and quicker, decisive narrative spin coming out of a debate than this one, and one that impacts more than the debate itself.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I can think of the only thing that seems similar to me in terms of sort of like the sense of catastrophe that emerged out of it was Obama's first debate against Romney back in 2012. I distinctly remember the kind of the rending of garments after that debate. But there were no calls for Obama to leave the race. This is the key thing, that his performance against Romney was widely considered to be terrible, but there was no like fundamental sense that maybe Obama wasn't prepared to actually run for re-election. It was more fear over weakness that seemed to be present in the campaign. Yeah. Here, obviously, Biden, there's this ambiance, right, of uncertainty about Biden's ability to campaign and stand toe-to-toe with Trump. And then we have this terrible debate performance in which it's not just that he stumbles over his words, which would be one thing. Like if he sounded clear and confident but stumbled a bit, don't think people would be so freaked out. If he were quieter and a little raspier but did not stumble over his words, then I think that would be one thing. But the combination of the raspiness and his stumbling, his occasional incoherence, it reinforced everyone's fears about Biden. So you're right. There's been this, not only was the debate performance terrible, but there's been this, call for him to drop out from Democratic electeds, certainly from liberal pundits of various stripes. And that is unusual. That's very unusual. That's new.
It is, and I think like your points about narrative and ambience are the key here, because to the extent that there was like a narrative about Obama with that first debate with Romney, it was he's too overconfident. Like, we had gone through 2010, where he said, I got this. And then the Democrats got slaughtered. And there was this notion of like, he's not taking this seriously enough.
Right.
And that was the existing narrative, but it just wasn't as omnipresent as the narrative of, is Biden old enough? And so this is like one of those worst things where the debate loss played right into the narrative. And let's play a clip. I mean, the other thing that was so frustrating is that like Trump lied. His performance was, even for like, what you'd expect from Trump, not particularly good, but there were so many layups that Biden missed in this situation that this is like, here, play this is the question about abortion.
Yes. This should have been something that he easily was able to respond to here. This is the issue for the Democrats that, I mean, I said this earlier, besides democracy being on the ballot is so important, right? And selling the urgency of that, I think, is undercut by Biden. Do we have this, Bradley? Yeah, I think it's undercut by Biden's performance, because it's like, how can it be so urgent if this is the guy that you're fielding? And then abortion is the other big issue, and he just flubbed this response here.
Been a terrible thing, what you've done. The fact is that the vast majority of constitutional scholars supported Roe when it was decided. Supported Roe. And that's this idea that they're all against it is just ridiculous. And this is the guy who says the state should be able to have it. We're a state where in 6 weeks, you don't even know whether you're pregnant or not, but you cannot see a doctor, and have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states, let each state have a different rule. Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in, they talk about that. But here's the deal: there's a lot of young women who are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers and sisters, it's just ridiculous, and they can do nothing about it. And they try to arrest them when they cross state lines.
Thank you.
I mean, he sort of started out okay, like he was, if I read the first couple of sentences, I was like, okay, but then he just clearly got lost.
Raped by an immigrant?
Yeah.
I mean,
he wasn't able to turn that into a cogent point. And I think as time went on in the debate, and it was what, 90 minutes, it was a very long 90 minutes.
Yeah.
As time went on, he got like a bit better, but just like wasn't able to do it. And
I mean, I hate to like have to play these clips on some level.
I mean, do you
because
really
it's like
have to?
everybody? But like, we got one more bad one, then we'll get to the one where you're talking about at the end, because maybe not everybody watched it. I mean, it's but like there is something uniquely problematic about the way that he answered that last question. Aside from it being a gimme, it was like, and clearly they over prepared him with these sort of like small stories, but it also in that one it felt like he got confused between narratives. Like, there's no politician in the world who's sitting there with an abortion, which is his big cudgel, and then pivots midway through it to bring up Donald Trump's talking point about immigrants murdering people. Like, it's just, that just doesn't, people don't do that. And here is another one where he had that sort of same, there's a similar dynamic.
I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this question about the national debt.
He had the largest national debt of any president in a 4-year period, number one. Number two, that $2 trillion tax cut benefited the very wealthy. What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
So that was in the first 10 minutes, right? I mean, I think that's when Sam and I started to have this sinking feeling in our gut. That's really hard to watch. But how he ends, we beat Medicare. He also didn't respond when Trump claimed that Biden was trying to cut Social Security and Medicare, which is another thing that he needs to be emphasizing. It's how would you not say it's the Republicans that have been wanting to cut Social Security since its inception and Medicare since its inception? Go on the offense. How can you cede that point?
I think so. Sam, you brought up a point about preparation, and I think Biden's performance here is one part his age and one part his ability. I think it's one part also maybe how Democrats are just preparing for these debates. They're preparing for them as if they are debates. But I think the one thing that Trump understands intuitively is that they aren't. They're showcases for you to create images. And what you say is actually not that important. And the moderators don't care, right? Like the moderators aren't going to step in and say, well, you didn't answer my question, Mr. President. No, they're going to let you go at it.
They could have been written. The moderators could have been replaced with literally written questions because they didn't respond to what was happening in front of them at all.
Right. The one useful place where AI might have a place to play might have been like moderators for these debates. So
true. It'd be fascinating, actually.
So in this case, how Democratic debaters should be prepped is just to sort of like say your talking points. Right? Like say, this is the message of the Democratic Party. Here's what Republicans are doing. Here's what they will do. And here's why you should vote for me. And that guy, that guy's a chump. That guy's a loser. That guy's a liar. And just sort of say that regardless of what the question is. Do a perfunctory, I heard the question, and then go into your talking points. Because there's nothing else there's no penalty for it.
Right. So why not? I couldn't agree more with that. And what struck me during the debate, let's assume, look, the problem is the moment where he got lost. Got completely lost. The problem was when he's talking about abortion and he sort of wanders into this immigrant murder, and you going to the funeral type of thing. That was the big problem. If those didn't exist, and he didn't, sort of like you say, like his voice wasn't raspy or whatever it was, then I my issue would be like, why do you keep like being defensive with Donald Trump? Like, why are you having to say, what do you say? Like, why are you even looking over at this guy? Like, right. You should be
on the offense.
The best time he had on the debate is when he's laughing.
Right. Yeah. The first thing out of his mouth should be, it's ridiculous that I'm on stage with this felon.
100%.
Yeah.
That's 100%. And that should have been the running theme throughout in his behavior, his demeanor, the way he answered every question. And so the prep was horrible. And I also say, and this is because I came from a background, whoever walked him through or walked through the set, which they definitely do, did not understand eye lines at all, because Donald Trump was always looking at the camera. And I suspect that's because of where he was positioned on the stage and where the camera was relative to the moderators. And Joe Biden, when he's answering a question, is looking over at the moderators and always is like angled from the camera, and it makes him look like he's out of it. It's a tiny thing, but this is like, we've known this is what it is for 60 years since Nixon, JFK.
Well, it's a tiny thing, but it's emblematic of this approach to like treating this like it's debate, treating it like the moderators matter. Like they don't. The moderators don't matter. The questions don't matter. Like none of it matters. All that matters is that you can present like a commanding image, and if you can do that, then, frankly, people in the press will say you won, regardless of what you said. They'll say, oh, yeah, he didn't answer the questions and he lied, but he was so commanding.
Yep.
And that's all you need. And I think it's really striking that Democratic Party debate prep, the White House, just like does not understand this and hasn't understood it, right? This was Obama's problem in 2012. This was Hillary Clinton's problem in 2016. Like, this is a recurring problem. And I think it speaks to an actual sort of structural problem in the Democratic Party.
They must have thought, like, we're going to take this into a quiet, old style, like, Buckley firing line type of thing. And you're going to really be able to take them into the weedy part of the pool, and you're going to be able to drown them there. And which is even a candidate who could think on his feet and actually deliver this stuff would have been problematic with that. This is the best part of the debate. Let's play this clip. This is the part where this should have been basically what Joe Biden did throughout. He should have smiled and just go, treat
him like a joke, which is what he did in 2020 to great effect.
And what he did to Paul Ryan.
Yep.
Look, he encouraged those folks to go up on Capitol Hill, number one. I sat in that dining room off the Oval Office. He sat there for 3 hours watching, begging, being begged by his vice president and a number of his colleagues on the Republican side as well to do something, to call for a stop, to end it. Instead, they talked about these people being patriots and great patrons of America. In fact, he says he'll not forgive them for what they've done. They've been convicted. He says he wants to commute their sentences and say that no. But he went to every single court in the nation. I don't know how many cases, scores of cases, including the Supreme Court, and they said no, this guy is responsible for doing what was done. He didn't do a damn thing, and these people should be in jail, and they should be the ones who are being held accountable. And he wants to let them all out. And now he says if he loses again, such a whiner that he is, that it could be a bloodbath.
Thank you, President Biden.
Okay.
President Trump.
That was not the best example of that. The best example of that is number 7. Sorry, he took way too long to get there, and in that instance, do number 7.
When he
Pop up number 7.
Where we have great respect for veterans. My son spent a year in Iraq, living right next to one of those burn pits, came back with stage 4 glioblastoma. I was recently in France for D-Day, and I spoke all about those heroes that died. I went to the World War I cemetery he refused to go to. He was standing with his 4-star general, and he told me, he said, I don't want to go in there because they're a bunch of losers and suckers. My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
President Trump.
I mean, just being able to sort of like drop insults on him, I think is indicative of where he was. I mean, there were other moments too, I think, where he said, you're a whiner, and he sort of laughed him off a little bit. But that should have been the tone from the. Go ahead.
The one time when he called him a felon, Trump got like very destabilized by it. I mean, it was striking. There hasn't been that much discussion of Trump's performance, but like from when I was watching it, I was sort of struck by how after about a half hour, Trump also lost whatever training he had and was just sort of like kind of speaking in this like elliptical, tirades. But also he really got going in a way that did not make him look good when Biden was like, you're a felon, and began like, litigating the whole thing. And I think that's a soft spot. I mean, it sounds crazy to be like, oh, it's a soft spot that the former president's a felon, but like it's a
it's sort of a big deal
that you should go for. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal.
It also occurred quite late into the debate, which I do think, to your point, Jamelle, shows a fundamental lack of understanding about this, because the moments that Biden did best were 50 minutes in, an hour and 10 minutes in, and the narrative was already set by that point. The die had been cast,
right.
And this was evident when the day after Trump was convicted of felonies, Biden held a press conference about what he said was an Israeli peace plan or ceasefire plan, and didn't address the elephant in the room, that his opponent had been convicted of 34 counts of felonies. And he did his viral moment where he got to do his dark Brandon thing and turned around and smiled at the camera because he thought that would be a way to look presidential instead of what you're saying. It's about the communication. This isn't about some game of looking more presidential or above things. Call him a convicted felon from the jump. Make that case from the beginning, because this is not the environment that they pretend that we live in anymore. I mean, we're not in 1972 or even 1992. It's about moments. It's about creating sound bites and call him a felon off the jump, right off the rip. Right?
It's not even 2012, right? I mean, we are in a media environment where everything is basically decontextualized. And so the goal, if you're a campaign, should be to create moments that play the same regardless of context. And the White House just doesn't seem to understand that this is the game they're playing. This is the fight they're in. What's that line from The Wire when Marlo walks up?
I've said this about a dozen times over the past 2 weeks.
You want it to be one way, but it's the other way.
Yeah. I mean, I've literally brought that up. I think we even played it. Like
Sam really has said that a million times.
I mean, that's the way it's been the past couple of weeks.
The Wire is a great text about American politics. So
it's it is just sort of stunning that the first time the words convicted felon were mentioned at the speech, it was Trump saying it to Biden.
No, I think I said that, but we missed it.
Okay.
Remember? Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well, all right. So, okay, with all that said about the actual, like what actually happened there, the more relevant part in terms of the implications going down the line are the spin. Thomas Friedman starts his column off today, where he is in a hotel in
Can I read it? The first opening sentence from Friedman. I watched the Biden-Trump debate alone in a Lisbon hotel room, and it made me weep.
You know, the sentiment's understandable, and of course, I imagine also being in a hotel room alone, maybe a little lonely. But here is the Morning Joe crew, which I think is really sort of like the most important thing. And this is the thing we were saying last night. Let's wait and see what Morning Joe says, because this is reportedly Joe Biden's most, his primary source of media. I mean, he wakes up to this every morning, and it really does feel like a lot of his political cues are taken from here. Here is what Morning Joe had to say.
I think his presidency has been an unqualified success. If, however, you believe, as do I, and as do so many people who watch this program and who fear just how dark of a place a second Donald Trump term will take America, then I think it's critical that we ask the same questions about this man I love, respect, and whose public service in saving this country from Donald Trump over the last 3.5 years I honor and always will. I think we have to ask the same questions of him that we have asked of Donald Trump since 2016, and that is, if he were CEO and he turned in a performance like that, would any corporation in America, any Fortune 500 corporation in America,
Tesla would give them
him on as
billions
CEO?
of dollars, but
If this were Donald Trump,
okay, I can't get through this. I honestly can't get through it because I just like, this is like, this is the breakup line, right? This is him like saying like, we've had a great relationship.
Yes.
And I
need to be with someone who could be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Okay.
Yeah, but so here is really the question that everybody has now, and you addressed this today, at least, or I saw on Blue Sky, some response to this. But what happens now? And let's go through some of the scenarios that are possible, like because. I think for a long time, I have felt like the cost associated with Biden dropping out, which is really is an unknown, but even just saying that, suggests the cost outweighed the cost of Biden staying in. Now it has there's feels to be like a slightly different calculus, although we don't know how normal people view this debate yet. But what's your sense?
Yeah. My sense is that calls for Biden to drop out are understandable, but I don't think they're weighing the downside risk enough. I think what people have in their mind's eye is, we can get to the convention, and at the convention we can, Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro or Wes Moore or J.B. Pritzker, Jared Polis. They're all like all the best people are going to vie for the nomination. Biden will let his pledged delegates go. Harris will be in the mat too. Everyone will vie for the nomination, and then out of this, we'll get this like strong nominee, and we can coalesce the party behind that nominee and go into the fall. And if you could guarantee that is what's going to happen, then yeah, Biden should step down. But there's a lot of downside risk that I'm not sure people are taking seriously enough. And I can kind of like go down the list. Like the first thing is there's this assumption that it's not going to be Kamala Harris. And I won't get into I think the weirdness of that assumption that Harris obviously could not be the nominee, but that's the assumption that it's not axiomatically going to be Kamala Harris. But why not? This isn't an open primary. This isn't the 2016. This isn't 2008. This isn't 1992, right? This isn't a situation where you have an incumbent president leaving office at the end of 8 years and everyone's vying for the nomination. This is a extremely unusual situation where the sitting president who is running for re-election decides they're not going to anymore. And why wouldn't Harris be the standard bearer? She is the standard. She would then be the standard bearer of the administration. Certainly, she is the one who was on the ticket in 2020 in the previous election. She is the one who kind of has any claim to any kind of democratic legitimacy as a nominee. And so, if you start from the premise that Harris would be the natural person to lay claim to the nomination, then your first question here is, well, what happens if you muscle her aside? What does that do to the Democratic Party? Some people might say, oh, everyone's just going to win, so they're not going to care. My hunch is that you muscle out Kamala Harris, who was on that ticket as a symbol of Joe Biden's commitment to the black voters who got him the nomination. You muscle her aside. And you muscle her aside after she's been a loyal vice president. No backbiting, no trying to get ahead of Biden. Loyal vice president in the same way that Biden was a loyal vice president to Obama. You muscle her aside. I think you're going to have some problems.
Where are you seeing that
among Democratic voters?
Where are you seeing that, Jamelle? I haven't seen that yet. I feel like she would be the natural person. That's my assumption, but I hadn't seen that.
I think.
Yeah.
In every single pundit I've seen talk about this, there are a handful of people who will say, yeah, it should be Harris. But I think the general assumption is that you'll have an open nomination process at the convention through some mechanism that no one's been able to describe yet.
Wow. I agree. So let's just start though. Like, let's start with the scenario that Kamala Harris is the nominee.
Right.
And why that's, if that's problematic, and if so, why? And my sense is that, like, I just look at this YouGov poll that did policies proposed by Joe Biden, and like he's got, I don't know, 15 or 16, 20 policies that are above 50% approval, whereas like Trump is 4. And, and it's basically, one is some phasing out imports from China, which I'm not convinced, essential goods from China, which I'm not convinced, frankly, that Biden hasn't been sort of like gearing up for either. But, and then, a couple of immigration, and then one about trans kids, which I don't think, really, like, I don't think any of the 5 to 100,000 votes that are going to, the race is going to come down to across 5 or 6 states. I don't think they're voting on that issue because they're already voting for Trump if they're going to. My point being that a generic Democratic platform and candidate wins. What is there something about, well, would Kamala Harris, I mean, like the question is like, does a black woman on the ticket motivate more Trumpy, racist, bigoted voters to come out in a way that Joe Biden, even as a feeble guy, couldn't, I guess, motivate? Right?
Yeah,
that's the question.
That's a good question. That's the question. I think also the question is sort of, okay, Biden has popular positions and Biden is unpopular. And so, if we swap out Biden, the person with the positions, but my sense is that whoever is going to be at the top of the ticket will be running as a standard bearer for the Biden administration. You're not going to be able to erase Joe Biden from the picture here. He's going to be in the background. And so how much of Biden's unpopularity translates to whoever's new nominee? For Harris, as the actual, the literal sitting vice president, I don't think she necessarily escapes whatever unpopularity is true of the Biden administration, aside from its positions. And so to me, it's like, those are the questions. Do you motivate kind of the worst possible voters to come out? And is Harris still weighed down by Biden's unpopularity? And I think that latter question applies to anyone who might plausibly be the nominee. And this is even assuming you get the strongest possible person, which is not a guarantee. There's a very real chance in the kind of contested convention situation that there will be people, very strong candidates, who say to themselves, I want to win this clean in 2028. And so what you're left with are people who may not be able to win, who may not have been able to win a primary under normal circumstances. And they get the nomination. And so they're not necessarily the strongest person you have gotten. So it's like, I don't know, it's possible grass might be greener on the other side.
Right.
Might not be. And I think the difficult thing for Democrats right now is that, like, there's no clear answer here. There is a lot of panic. There's a lot of consternation. But right now, it does not feel like there's any sort of, like, actual serious assessment of what is the risk here of either path, of sticking with Biden or trying to find someone else. And until I see, like, high-level Democrats, like, actually grappling with that and not just sort of, like, having a fit, I'm like kind of skeptical. Because
do you think they are? I mean, what do you think is happening? Like, and
devil,
I mean, like, I've gotten a million texts over the past 12 hours. Are they going to, get rid of Biden? And I'm like, all I write back is like, who's the they? Like, who is the they? In this instance, I mean,
this is
donors. Donors maybe call. Like, apparently he has this big fundraiser in the Hamptons over the weekend. That's gonna. The donors start to pull out and say we need somebody new. I think that's gonna make a difference. I also think down ballot Democrats, if they're flipping out, that could make a difference. And that's why Claire McCaskill's going out there. She still has friends in the House and the Senate that are probably freaking out. Those are the levers of power that we're not seeing in public. But that could make that difference. But
are they going to be able to convince Joe Biden? Because it really has to. It doesn't work unless Joe Biden is somehow convinced that of this equation, that on the other side, and then the question also becomes like, what has to be delivered to Joe Biden to see that the grass is greener on the other side? I mean, does Barack Obama come in? Jill Biden calls Barack Obama and says, hey, I'll say something to Joe if you'll say something to Joe, but, we need to be able to get Gretchen Whitmer, in there. And can you speak to Kamala? I mean, what are the machinations that happen? Do you have any insight into this?
Yeah.
Because I have no clue as to what would be going on.
I have no insight into this whatsoever. It would be at that grand. I'm not even sure donors would make the difference. I do think it'd have to be at this like very granular level, sort of Biden's closest associates. And it's not only is it difficult to figure out how this would work. But in order for it to be successful, for this not to be, to this not result in choosing a nominee that is unsatisfying to many people and that just results in like a fall of backbiting and recrimination, everyone has to be on the same page.
Yes.
There in effect cannot really be any kind of contest to the convention. It has to be a unified, behind doors decision that is then sold by everyone.
Kamala Harris comes out.
I'm also
in the same
skeptical that the
speech.
Democratic Party is capable of doing something like this.
They did it in 2020. They did it. Obama got everybody to drop out to coalesce behind Biden.
Yeah, pretend he's Bernie.
Yeah, let's right, exactly. I mean, that's the scenario, right?
Different situation.
Yeah.
Again, it's a completely different scenario. I think the fact that this is an incumbent president currently running for re-election dropping out makes this something unlike anything else. In the 2020 situation, even then, right? There are claims you can make. You can say, well, Bernie Sanders only represents like a small and unrepresentative faction of the entire party. Whether or not that's true, that's an argument you can make, that we don't want to have a nominee that can only win 30% of the entire party. We want someone more mainstream. But like that, those questions aren't here for that. Like, you know, Biden won. He won the presidency with a majority of the vote. And Kamala Harris, you know, on the same ticket. And so that democratic legitimacy has a lot of power.
She
if
would
you're
have
going
to
relinquish it,
she would have to, I mean, the announcement would almost have to be in unison where she says, I'm going to be vice president again. And then the person coming in would have to say something to the effect of like, I'm only going to do one term. I mean, none of this stuff, it's all fantasy stuff.
Right.
It's all no politician
you'll have to
say that.
And Harris is not going to say, I'm going to be vice president again. It'll be, you know, we're going to have an entirely new ticket, I suppose. The other thing here is, okay, Biden decides he's not going to run again. So then it's sort of like, I'm not capable of running for re-election in this state. Well, can you be president? Why shouldn't you resign the presidency too? Right. And so there's this real possibility, right, that this kind of becomes it. Biden resigns the presidency altogether. And now you have Donald Trump arguing to a national audience the Democrats cannot be trusted to lead this country. They're too unstable. And you have the president resigning and a scramble to find a new nominee. So that's like, to me, that's a worse situation to be in than to just have like, you know,
I don't know.
old
I mean,
Scranton Joe trying to mumble his way through. But
I've been listening to the public. I've been listening to people around me. And
not easy, but
but I care so much about the protection of democracy that I feel that I can hand this off to X, Y, and Z, and then he can gracefully leave the presidency at the end in January. I mean, I don't see that as far-fetched. I mean, maybe I'm wish casting a little bit, but I feel like it's not the performance alone. It's the way I saw every Democratic pundit respond last night, which makes me think that there's something that we don't know at this point. I don't know.
Either there's something we don't know, or that this is where I am. I mean, be completely frank. Either there's something I'm missing here, or that there's a lot of groupthink happening. And I myself am just natively skeptical when everyone starts saying the same thing. With like in the same intonation, using the same language. It's sort of like, okay, maybe that's the case, but maybe it's not. And I think even if I'm wrong here, and it may well be, I think it's important to sort of just like do pushback. Like, let's think about what this looks like actually, nuts and bolts in practice, to do something that's never been done before, right? Not even in '68, right? Johnson had announced he wasn't running well before the primary '68 convention, right? So it's sort of like there's an open primary at the beginning of 1968, right? And the debacle with Humphrey is sort of like the product of things that no one could have ever possibly predicted, right? Like assassinations and all this stuff. But there's never been anything like this in the modern era. And so I'm just natively skeptical of like the confidence with which people are saying, oh, well, nothing could be worse than having Biden the top of the ticket. Maybe.
I suspect, and you tell me if you think this is sort of the scenario that we're facing, sometime over the next week or two or three, they're going to be measuring like how much of a story is this? Is there going to be something? And I suspect that something is going to happen over the next 2 or 3 weeks that is going to be either, Biden going out, like, I mean, I remember when Bill Clinton, bombed a factory in Libya, to deal with his problems. Sudan, I guess. It's in Sudan, yes. And I suspect we're going to see, I don't know if it's, one of those type of things or something else that is going to give a cause for Biden to get out in front of the American public again so that they can sort of try and reset the clock in the way that the State of the Union did. And that nothing's going to happen until we have that event. And if that event goes in a way that is like ends this narrative, then that's it until the next thing starts the narrative again. Or it is another example of like, you tried and you didn't convince anybody. But there's no way, it seems to me, that Biden just goes like, all right, you're right. I'm not up to this and signs off. I think like there's going to have to be one more bite at the apple for him before he does that. Because it comes down to him, doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to him.
I think that the only thing that might really settle doubts or settle panic, maybe not doubts, is if Biden just does like a true media blitz, like sit down interviews with major networks, with the Times, just really kind of make himself open out there, try to hold rallies, like really be out there. I think that he can do at this point. And if the White House isn't doing that kind of thing, then,
right. Biden shows up on,
the conversations are quite serious over there.
Biden shows up on Morning Joe later the week, and he goes and he becomes Thomas Friedman's roomie in Lisbon. So, and they have dinner together and
they eat ice cream and talk
Friedman
about
comes
their
out and goes
feelings.
like, I had a one-on-one. He was great. He just turned out he had a bug the other night and he didn't feel well or whatever it is. All right, I want to just a couple of minutes, and we've held you way too long, and I apologize for that. But just a couple of minutes on the implications of the Supreme Court, because it's like, as it completely contextualizes the
urgency.
stakes that are at play here in terms of this presidential election. Because you've got two Supreme Court justices who have indicated one way or another that they want to resign during a Trump administration so they can be replaced by, Thomas and Scalia and Alito, I should say, so they can be replaced by clones of them, but just 30 years younger. So we get this regime, and probably worse even, based upon what's coming out of the Federal Society. It's as if like we picked this day after the debate to just tell you like it's the things are going to get a lot worse in this country, and you're going to need to win an election or 5 before it gets better.
Yeah.
The Chevron deference, I mean, the administrative state, this is one of the biggest outside of like Dobbs. This is, I think, one of the most far reaching and will touch probably more people's lives, maybe not as dramatically and in a way that they'll be aware of, but it will touch more people's lives over the next 20, 30 years than any other decision that we've been alive for, I think. What's your sense of how that goes?
Yeah, I mean, for viewers who don't know, back in 1980.
Oh, we're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah.
You're back now, though.
Yeah. For viewers who don't know, back in 1984, are we breaking up?
No, we hear you
Are
now.
we back?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're back in. Okay. Back in 1984, the court decided, and I mentioned the year because this is the Reagan administration. It's kind of the first truly conservative administration, like what we would recognize as conservative ideological administration, and they have control of the administrative state in a big way, and they want courts to defer to their understandings of law, of what the agencies can do. And so a conservative leaning Supreme Court decides in 84 that yes, when there is conflict over sort of interpretation of a regulation, the agency's interpretation kind of takes precedent. It's like if it's a reasonable agency interpretation, then that's what the interpretation is. Here we are 40 years later, and conservatives are extraordinarily hostile to the administrative state, do not believe that it should exist. And so here we are with this new case, which overturns that and says, oh, actually, no, the judges have the expertise and statutory interpretation that will allow them to decide what is a reasonable interpretation. And it just so happens that the judiciary leans Republican. So look at that. It weakens federal agencies. And I would say, conservatives present this as returning power back to Congress. But at no point in the history of Congress has Congress ever been able to do minutia about what its laws and regulations require. Even going back to the early 19th century, right? Customs officials, for example, tariff officials on riverways had some discretion about how they were going to exercise their legal authority. And so in my view, if Congress says we were going to give the executive agencies this kind of power, and we're going to allow them to make interpretations, reasonable interpretations, if Congress has said this, then that's what Congress has said, and the courts don't really have any business saying, well, Congress can't do that. What this ruling does is put power in the hands of judges to determine what kind of regulations ought to be allowed, but are reasonable interpretations, which means because judges are not experts, right? John Roberts may say that they are experts in statutory interpretation, but they're not experts in the actual specific subject matter. And so what this means is we're going to have a bunch of amateurs basically determining what regulations are reasonable. And we already kind of saw a picture of this with the court's decision, what was it, last week on bump stocks.
Yeah.
Where the majority decision is sort of going over the mechanics of a gun and being like, oh, well, the mechanism has to be fired individually. So can we really say it's a machine gun? And I thought Sotomayor's dissent, where she's like, listen, you pull the trigger and it shoots multiple bullets. I don't know what's complicated about this. Is the right one, but that whole exercise, that whole exercise of trying to determine exactly how the gun works is what we're going to see more of from lower courts. Lower courts that are overburdened and don't necessarily have like the staff or resources to really do a deep dive into all sorts of different regulations covering a vast areas of American life. So this weakens agencies, it strengthens the courts, it strengthens the Supreme Court in particular. And yeah, it's bad for ordinary Americans. It's bad if Health and Human Services or the EPA or the Securities and Exchange Commission can't make decisions based on expertise and well-informed knowledge of what the law says.
I mean, all I can think of is there was just this year the EPA came out with something about with forever chemicals, and that is it seems to me a perfect example of who decides whether a forever chemical is bad for you or not. And it's either going to be scientists at the EPA are going to say you know what, we've determined, we don't know for sure how much is going to kill this many people going forward. There's no way to know that, but we've got the preponderance of the evidence. This is what we've established. And so this runs afoul of whatever it is, the Clean Water Act or whatever act it is. And the Chevron deference means that the people who pump this stuff out, the forever chemicals can go to a court and go like, this is not, we've got a scientist that we have, an in-house scientist who says it's not. And the court just goes like, well, we got to decide. We're going to take a couple of weeks and decide what's, going to kill people or not. And if they're a Republican court,
oh, the Fifth Circuit's going to be busy.
yeah, where, they'll all be brought in Texas and they're going to decide, you know what, actually, people can live with this in their system. It's not a problem. I mean, this is an example of it, and it terrifies me. But Jamelle, I'm sorry we didn't have more time to talk about the Supreme Court. That was the plan, but things happen, I guess. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Jamelle Bouie. We will link to.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you going to do? We will.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Your columns. Thanks so much. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.